Hi again. So I'm going to continue on with my reflections and my opinion of Deep Purple's music. So in the last section, I was talking about sort of the explosive period of the band between 1970 and 1972, where they really found their voice and just moved forward with that. And for a variety of reasons, the next period, and this is going to be from 1973 to 1976, I find this sort of a problematic period of the band, because I think within 3 years you had 3 different lineups releasing 4 albums, and sort of the trajectory that they had set was no longer in place. It was a different band with a different outlook on music. So the first album that followed Machine Head was Who Do We Think We Are? And this was the final studio album with Ian Gillan and Roger Glover in place. It was a struggle because I don't think at this point Ian Gillan was traveling even with the rest of the band. So communications had broken off and they were just a troubled band. So, I mean, you're not going to end up with a really, cohesive album if people aren't talking together. Going through the tracks, you have Woman from Tokyo. I like that typo here, Tokyo. I think he sings it like that, but it's Tokyo. Mary Long, Super Trooper, Smooth Dancer on side 1. And, I mean, while there's nothing wrong with these songs, they don't have that fun that the earlier albums had, the earlier songs. A Woman from Tokyo, they're following a format now where they slow down in the middle part and have some doubled vocals, kind of like what they did in Machine Head with, what was the track? Never Before. And so it sort of follows that, and things are starting to become a little cookie cutter at this point. You have the fast songs with, your verse, your chorus, a guitar solo, a bridge, the keyboard solo, the verse, the chorus, and the outro. That's kind of with a riff, and that's kind of the formula that they followed for a while. Rat Bat Blue, Place in Line, and Our Lady. I like Our Lady. That's a good song. And, the songs themselves are pretty decent on this. And I love the singing still. But it's not a fun album. It's straightforward. And it still sounds great. They had that chemistry there still amongst the players that it still really kicked. But there's nothing new on this. They're kind of treading water. So after that album, and that was one of the reasons Ian Gillan left. He had given them a bunch of notice, basically saying that he felt that they weren't exploring the way that they should. And I think he's finding that sort of after Machine Head, they were going a little down one path. So he left. And Roger Glover was going to stick around, but unbeknownst to him, after the last show with Ian Gillan, he ended up being fired. So it was back to the original core members of Ritchie Blackmore, John Lord, and Ian Pace. And so they moved on to the next album, and they recruited a bass player and singer named Glenn Hughes, and a lead singer, David Coverdale. Glenn Hughes had been in a band called Trapeze, and they had some success, but Glenn Hughes, or David Coverdale, was a bit of an unknown. And so they changed their style of music for this somewhat in the delivery. The chops were still really good. I mean, John Lord and Blackmore. I think Blackmore's probably at his, personally at this point, peak playing for precision and just power and explosiveness. And I mean, Ian Pace was probably the best rock drummer in the world, and John Lord. But the new ingredients that they brought into the mix with Glenn Hughes as sort of a funky, earthier kind of singer and songwriter, and David Coverdale, who had a much bluesier voice than Ian Gillan. It was a little different. This was deliberate on Richie Blackmore's, I guess, decision to take the band in a bluesier direction. In any case, Burn was a huge hit, following and built entirely on the success of the previous lineup. You have your first track, Burn, which is sort of perfecting that mold, that model that Deep Purple would use for most of their songs from here on out, until the early 1990s. But you had Burn, Might Just Take Your Life, Lay Down, Stay Down, Sail Away, which is kind of a neat. I always thought that riff reminded me of, I think Metallica might have been listening to that when they came up with Enter Sandman. There's some similarities in structure. You Fool No One, What's Going On Here, Mistreated, and A200. This is an enormously popular album for a lot of Deep Purple fans. I think, for me, I got to be honest, Ian Gillan was and is the singer for Deep Purple. I find I don't care for the singing too much on this, and the songs weren't. It was a little more typical of 70s hard rock at this point. I mean, the musicianship was top notch and they were explosive on stage, but I don't know. I think it was just a little more typical versus Zeppelin had its own thing. Deep Purple up to Machine Head even had its own thing happening. They were completely different from everybody else. But it sounds like with the next couple of albums, it's a step up from Foghat for me. And if you're a Foghat fan, I apologize. So you have Burn, and that was 1974, I believe, released. And in the same year, they released Stormbringer. And this was the point where Richie Blackmore was looking elsewhere, moving eventually on to Rainbow. He was going through, I think he was going through divorce at this point, and he was just sort of not fully immersed in the band. He didn't like the direction that Glenn Hughes and David Coverdale were taking the band, which is interesting, is because that's why he brought them in the first place. However, I think he found it was getting a little too earthy for him, and he sort of withdrew from the process of this album and left it up to the rest of the band. And again, the performances are all amazing. Let's take a look at some of the songs here. But again, what I like most about the previous couple of lineups with Ian Gillan and Roger Glover doing the lyrics and then the Mark I stuff, there was some fun stuff. But also with this lineup, I find that there's a bit of like crotch thrusting and yelping on stage and stuff. They have their fans, but it just doesn't work for me. Like Stormbringer, Love Don't Mean a Thing, Holy Man. No, I do like Holy Man. Hold On is a pretty neat, sarcastic solo by Richie Blackmore. The song is... They weren't a proggy band at this point. They were sort of a bluesy, funky, hard rock band. But he does this amazing solo, and apparently he hadn't heard the song. He walked in, and the rumor is, I don't know if it's true or not, but played the solo in one take, and then just left again. And it's a pretty good solo. So that's sort of side one. Side two, you get Lady Double Dealer, You Can't Do It Right with the One You Love, Highball Shooter, The Gypsy, and Soldier of Fortune. I mean, I could see why fans really like this stuff, but I mean, you can't do it right with the one you love. I mean, and the Gypsy Soldier of Fortune's all right. But I mean, you got to be a David Coverdale fan to enjoy that. And not that I'm just not a fan. So that was Stormbringer. So they were moving away from this explosive music with sort of proggy elements to like a blues hard rock band with this. And so Ritchie Blackmore left, and they decided, I believe the management more than likely convinced the band to carry on with another member. And this time they got Tommy Bolin. And he had played in some other bands. He played with Billy Cobham, and he was an established artist, and he was an amazing guitarist, troubled, addicted to drugs. And that eventually, between his addiction and Glenn Hughes was, he was having his own drug issues at that point. Sort of, the band was no longer a great live performing unit. But this is the last album that they released called Come Taste the Band. And I mean, the cover says it all. Let's check out you're definitely getting to sort of a funky blues hard rock band at this point, a little more straightforward. Coming Home, I actually don't mind that song, and I don't mind Getting Tighter, but like Lady Luck, I Need Love, I'm not cranking up a song called I Need Love. The Drifter, Love Child, This Time Around, that's pretty good too. You Keep on Moving is pretty neat as well. But I mean, this is a completely different style. So if you're looking for the typical Deep Purple stuff, this is not it. Yeah. So they broke up, and I think the label and probably management decided to put out one last live album, and this is from the last tour with Ritchie Blackmore, and this is Made in Europe. And while very high energy, I don't think it doesn't approach Made in Japan as far as I'm concerned. Burn is very high energy, and that's great. I just find the band is more cookie cutter at this point. The solos are all great, but it's a little safer. And then you got again, there's some yelping that goes on in here. Glenn Hughes, doesn't have a shirt on. It does have its fans, but Stormbringer, it's well performed, but I don't listen to this. I don't listen to it at all. So that was the last sort of album that they released in the 70s until they reunited in 1984. So I'll have a look at that next.